Bernie Zapor is with the ATF. He also joins us on the phone. ATF teams en route right now to the scene. Typically, they're the ones who, by virtue of their name, deal with the guns that were involved and the firearms and the ammunition. And when you think about this, Bernie, 21 people shot and wounded, 3 police officers shot, and 5 civilians dead. This guy had to have an awful lot of firepower with him.
It doesn't take, surprisingly, it doesn't take that much. But if my guess was it would be a rifle caliber weapon in this case. It also presents a major tactical problem for law enforcement and public safety. You asked the question of the Odessa PIO about potential other victims. You know, along the route of this event, you know, neighbors and friends and employers should check on folks to make sure they have contact, because if this was a rifle involved, its reach can be half a mile or more. And people, when they're traumatized, sometimes will crawl away, and they may not have the ability of contacting EMS for support. So as a community, we want to check on each other, because there could be potential people who've been victimized by this that have not been able to reach out for help.
Yeah, we're learning a little bit more about how chaotic things were there. This from the Associated Press. Cell phone video showed people running out of the movie theater. Television station KOSA aired breaking developments on live television. Their broadcast was interrupted by police telling them they had to clear the area. It gives you chills to read. You can only imagine the fear of people who weren't in a confined area, as you so often hear about in active situations, active shooter situations, but may have been in their cars, in parking lots, standing around as somebody was driving around at one point in a mail truck shooting at people.
Unfortunately, we are having the national experience of these events compounding on each other. So all of us as individuals, we react based on the experience of learning of these things and what our personal reaction would be. In addition to that, you know, there should be the widespread training of run, hide, fight, but every situation is different. It's just very hard to identify. And outside, you know, this is immeasurable how complex this would have been. And for those poor folks, even the ones that have not received physical trauma, they'll be traumatized by this for life. And again, you know, a search has to be ongoing through the community to make sure there's no additional physical victims.
Yeah, this also from the Associated Press, quoting an eyewitness there. He was sitting in his truck at a Starbucks when he heard 6 gunshots ring out 50 yards behind him. Eyewitness reports are always sketchy at best in situations like this, but this one is compelling in particular. At first, he thought it might have been a tire blowing, but he heard more shots, spotted a white sedan with a passenger window that had been shattered. That's when he thought, quote, "Oh man, this is a shooting." He got out to make sure everyone was safe. He said there was a little girl bleeding nearby who was grazed in the face, and that's when the police showed up with their rifles and jumped out of the car. Talk to us about the difficulty for police in triangulating a suspect in a situation like this. One thing if you have an active shooter in a school or a Walmart or a shopping center or a movie theater. It's very different when somebody's mobile.
It's actually acoustically, and because of sonics, it's very difficult to identify the source and location of where gunfire is originating. Inside of a building, for example, you could have, because of the building, the way it's engineered, there could be gunfire going off in relatively close proximity. It doesn't sound like gunfire necessarily. Outside, gunfire would be going off at some distance, but because of acoustics and the topography, it's very loud and sounds like it's close. It's a very difficult proposition to identify when it's happening, where they came from. In the interviews that will take place in this situation, they're going to be putting together so many witness statements they'll be able to get a better picture, but it takes time. It's not as identifiable as one would think.
Well, and they can't interview the suspect in this case because he's dead. Bernie, we appreciate you being with us. We're going to try to get another break in here, but stick around because we want to come back to you on what the ATF's role in this is going to be and looking at the firearms here. We appreciate your time, sir.
You bet.
We bring in Bernard Zapor with the ATF, at least was with the ATF, now a consultant in the private sector. I'll ask you the same question as we break down this DPS, the Department of Public Safety there in Texas's statement, that this guy fired at the troopers even before he stopped his car.
I hate to speculate, but you think in terms of, this went from evading a car stop to a human hunt. And someplace in his mind, he had prepared for this mentally, probably was exchanging ammunition magazines or had a significant amount of ammunition available in a single magazine source while operating a vehicle, while looking for people to do this to. This has been in his function of his brain for some time. And obviously, a sociopathic killer.
Are we making too big of a jump here? I mean, there's a lot of times that people who are drug dealers, other types of criminals, are getting pulled over by police officers and get into a shootout because they don't want to be caught. Is that something to think about?
I think let's say that this person is a multi-convicted felon and he doesn't want to go back to penitentiary. I mean, is he going to be circling back around and making other moves in this thing in his attempt to escape, his choice of vehicle? I mean, somewhere in his life, either through a life of crime or a life of morbid fantasy, he had the idea of causing mass casualty and having himself armed to do it.
Yeah, well, clearly he was armed to do it, as they point out. This from the AP. State police say West Texas shooting began when suspect was stopped for failing a left turn signal while driving. So you've got a state trooper vehicle going down the highway, two state troopers there, and they see somebody not use their turn signal, and that's how this all began. So wherever he was headed, he certainly didn't want to be stopped on the way.
It's the investigation is going to yield a significk picture.
What are they going to be able to find out about this rifle, just drawing on your ATF expertise?
There's a life of every firearm. They'll be able to determine if it was imported or manufactured in the United States, at what retail location it was sold to. At that part, they may not have anything beyond that because it could have changed hands. But in terms of the life of the firearm, it's really going to tie into what this person's plan was for that day. I mean, did they intercept him on his way to do something else? It could be a multitude of things. Again, not to speculate. Was there a domestic violence, or he's a multi-convicted felon, or did he have some kind of plan? Their investigation is going to be able to yield that. They will never know the real motive and intent because they can't get to the heart of this suspect. But they'll paint a picture there that is probably going to be broader than we could speculate.